So we refuse just to deal with the misery of the moment, and we're also very much focused on, how can we transform the situation that we're in, using ecology, using the environment, in order to make sure that the rebuilding in Gaza, but not only in Gaza, happens in a completely different way. Happens in a way that on the one hand would not allow a terrorist group like Hamas to come back, but also not allow extremist groups in Israel that want to build settlements in Gaza take over either. And we're a very small group with 60 staff in Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, and we don't have, the political power to bring on such changes. But we were looking for coalitions that do have political power. And in January already, while we're doing the humanitarian stuff, we're rethinking our strategy. An earlier strategy of ours was the Green-Blue Deal for the Middle East, built on the European idea of the European Green Deal of how to combat the climate crisis. And we thought, well, we need to go broader. It's clear that Israelis and Palestinians are incapable of solving this conflict alone. And we really do need to benefit from a broader coalition. And we looked at the coalition document that was signed in September of 23 at the G20 by 8 countries to create a India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Now, isn't it odd that the Environment Group is looking at an economic corridor to be a game changer? Well, we think that that's exactly what we need to do. We need to be odd. We need to be thinking out of the box, because if we are only thinking environment and not connecting environment with economy and climate and security, then we're not going to be able to make a difference, because we'll be left speaking to those that already agree with us. And we won't make a difference if we just speak to those. We need to speak to a much broader audience. And we identified IMEC, this economic corridor that is designed to link India, the Middle East, and Europe, looking at the different reasoning of the leadership involved. So the European Union, Germany, Italy, and France are signatories. They're one of they're 4 of the 8 signatories of IMEC, and we can see some of the reasoning that President van der Leyen speaks to, and she actually speaks to the environment. She sees this as a corridor of renewables, of how to advance Europe's green deal by purchasing renewable energies. And we think, okay, this is good. The Saudi Crown Prince MBS sees the economy, but interestingly, he mostly sees that this is an opportunity for him to move beyond oil. And when you look at his 2030 vision, there's heavy discussions of the possibility of Saudi Arabia being a major producer of renewables and selling that renewables through the corridor on to Europe. Similarly, MBZ, I mean, it's famous for, my grandfather, lived with a camel. I don't want my grandchildren to go back to camels. The oil is running out, and for them, the oil is very much running out. And they understand, perhaps even better than the Saudis, how important it is to advance cooperation. India, concerned about China and sees IMEC as an issue to compete with China. And of course, Biden also. President Biden was very much focused on the corridor as a means to compete with the Belt and Road that the Chinese. Trump will now be in power, and of course that's a game changer for IMEC. And we don't know whether Trump will embrace, but we suspect that he will, because he's very much a transactional person, and this is very much a transactional concept of a corridor, of an economic corridor. And we also think that we hope, and we'll be marketing our ideas through the Abraham Accords type of philosophy that he advanced. So what's different about EcoPeace's vision, however, is that we think that we need to utilize the economic corridor in order to advance Middle East peace and to see the interrelations of Palestine, Israel, and Jordan as something at the center of the economic corridor that the leadership, that the 8 countries are talking about. And interestingly enough, even though the corridor was seen to go through Jordan and Israel, Israel and Jordan are not signatories of IMEC, and neither is the Palestinian Authority. And then when we look at what the 8 IMEC countries speak to when it comes to the peace process, they're all major supporters, I mean, now other than Trump, of the two-state solution. So we also saw an alignment between this economic corridor and this interest of advancing Middle East peace through a two-state solution. And when you look at Trump's details, Trump is also, his deal, whether you like it or not, is a two-state deal. Go into it otherwise. And the way that, and of course within Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he's at the United Nations last September, what map does he hold in his hand? He holds the IMEC map. Now, there's no Gaza on that map, there's no West Bank on that map, but he understands that interconnectedness that IMEC represents is the future for this country. So we see lots of rationale as to how we can utilize the economic engine to advance peace, but in a sustainable way. And that's why we propose 3 catalytic projects, one on water and energy, one on the export of energy, and the other, the connector. EcoPeace is responsible for a project called Project Prosperity, which is the desalination of water on the Israeli coast and its potential sale to Jordan, and large investment in renewables and its sale to Israel. It's a $1 billion deal. It's a recipe of climate resilience because on the one hand it's climate mitigation through increased renewables, and it's climate adaptation because the water scarcity is the biggest threat facing this region. So in Israel, 80% of our water comes from desalination, but in Jordan there currently isn't any desalination, and Amman gets water 8 hours a week. We're the only country in this region that has 24/7 water. Even Damascus doesn't have. Beirut, forget it. West Bank, Gaza also. So desalination is a game changer, and what we're saying in a day after is that not only should the desalination be in Israel, but the desalination should also be in Gaza. And we'd originally proposed this, but this didn't move forward because with Hamas in power in Gaza, the government of Israel were not interested, and even the Emiratis, who were going to finance much of this $1 billion investment, were also not willing. But with Hamas, and that's a condition, that Hamas not be in Gaza, we're coming and proposing a large 200 million cubic meter desalination plant that is beyond the needs of Gaza. Gaza needs about 50 million. Another 50 million could be provided to the West Bank. But another 100 million could be utilized through Israel's national water carrier, the same way that the Israeli desalination would come to Jordan. another 100 million could come to Jordan. And we're coming and showing that this is a transformational in peace building, because it means that, one, building a large plant, the international community is talking about a 50 million cubic meter plant. We're talking about a 200 million. A 50 million plant costs about $1 a cubic meter for water. Very expensive water for a Palestinian population. You build a 200 million, you can produce water at 50 cents a cubic meter, half the price, much more affordable. But more interestingly is that if half the water can be sold, in this case to Jordan, it means that you can have an investor. And we've spoken to the Saudis and to the Emiratis, and they're interested in investing in Gaza under conditions of a two-state solution. So we now have, not as a donor program, we have the potential of a private sector program, because half the money has the potential of revenue. And if 100 million cubic meters is sold to Jordan, then it becomes Jordan's water security interest to make sure that there's stability in Gaza. If the investor is Masdar of the UAE or a Saudi company, then in our conversations with the Israeli military, then they feel much more confident that the pipes that are used to desalinate the water will stay in the desalination plant and will not be taken for missiles like Hamas was doing, because the Saudi or the Emirati investor will lose their business. So Israeli military officials and Israel's National Security Council are interested in the transformative nature of the idea of creating interdependencies, economic, water security for national security. A second catalytic project, I've only got three, is again building on the vision of MBS to be a major exporter of renewables, particularly looking at NEOM in the northwestern corner of Saudi Arabia, together with Jordan's vision. Jordan also wants to be a renewable energy export, both solar, wind, green hydrogen, and Sinai in Egypt, a Tel Aviv University initial study. We actually have German funding, German government funding through the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung to do a more detailed study that we'll be presenting in Brussels at the European Commission in February. And we have an Emirati-Israeli consortium doing the study. The Tel Aviv University study shows that the area of the intersection of Sinai, Saudi, Jordan can produce 50% of the electricity needs of our own countries through renewable energy, and 30% of the electricity of the eastern side of Europe, from Greece to Berlin to Germany, at prices that are competitive, that make it an economic, and that's what our current consultants are reconfirming, and that's what's going to be presented. So that what we're saying is that, so these ideas are not all ours. Europe has plans to connect electricity to Haifa. Europe has plans to connect electricity to Egypt. These are the interconnectors that European Union has already funded the connection between Athens and Crete. It's well advanced to Cyprus. 100 million euros has been allocated to Haifa. We're saying great, but not good enough. How do we make sure that the concern for the environment and shared prosperity fully integrates also our Palestinian neighbors? And we're saying Gaza also needs to be an export node. And we need to make sure that Saudi's export of renewables, which is Saudi's 2030 vision, it's the very heart of how it sees itself remaining prosperous. It's that Saudi's security will be at stake if Gaza is not stable. And therefore, the stability and the peace between Israelis and Palestinians becomes a national security issue of our neighborhood, including Europe. Because if something goes wrong here, 30% of at least the eastern side of Europe's energy also becomes at risk. So there's investments and there's risks to be taken, but there's even greater risks if we don't move forward. And lastly, there's the transport idea. Again, this is not an EcoPeace idea. The transport idea is even an idea of the current Minister of Defense of Israel, Katz, who came to Brussels, I don't know whether you were there, and presented in a video the train idea after October 7th, and no one understood what the hell is the relationship. But nevertheless, the train idea is a good idea as long as it's an electrified train, of course, using renewables. And it's the idea to move goods from India across to the Middle East. The railway link between Oman and the Emirates is under design. Between the Emirates and Saudi Arabia is actually beyond design. It's being financed. The Saudis have built a railway line all the way to the border with Jordan. There's nothing at the border. There's no reason to be investing tens of millions of dollars for that railway, other than if you thought that that railway was going to continue to Haifa. And it speaks to the Saudis' vision of normalization with Israel. And we're saying that's brilliant, but it's not good enough. We need to turn Jordan into a hub and have a second railway to Gaza. Have a second railway that leaves Jordan through Hebron and has the private sector connect the West Bank and Gaza. And no less important, again, not an EcoPeace idea, the island port of Gaza is again a Katz idea. It's not only. This is from the Portland Trust. It's also a Palestinian Authority idea, of course. But rather than having a port which only services the Palestinian needs and probably would not be very successful because it's a very small economy. But if you connect the railway of IMEC, like designed for Haifa, also to Gaza, then you have a Rotterdam and you have a Hamburg. These are German and Dutch ports that service all of Europe. They don't just serve Germany or the Netherlands. And if we can have a Haifa and a Gaza port serving the Middle East, then again, we transform the interests of all of our countries to find some of those philosophical solutions that you talked about of not only caring for each other out of the goodness, and I want to believe that we all hold that goodness, but also for our own national security interests, which have still withstood the test of time, and Europe is the test for the moment. Because the bloodshed and the horrors that we experience has been the experience of Europe for hundreds of years before the Second World War. And no one, and I speak to people who grew up after the war. My father, of course, is a Holocaust survivor, but left Europe very quickly. The French and Germans did not imagine that they could build a European Union together. What was the ingredients of the European Union? It was not kindness and goodness. It was an economic engine of coal and steel that were the engines of cooperation that helped build other issues and lots of trust. So we're trying to learn from that experience. And when people come and say, in the midst of the horrors that we're currently going through, that there's no one to talk to, and there's no future, and there's no hope, we're coming and saying, no, we refuse to accept that. And we come and look at the experience of Europe after its horrors and its prosperity with all its problems, but it's still a prosperous, interconnected, wealthy continent. We too, here in the Middle East, can be a prosperous, wealthy, sustainable, and be at the heart of that sustainability through the sun that we're blessed with, to turn that resource into something that we sell, but we sell together in order to defeat the spoilers that we have on both sides that are undertaking acts that we can't accept and we can't live with. So thank you very much.